This week on What in the World is Going On, I'm going to be talking about Israel setting a new standard for the ethics of war. So stay tuned, friends. We at the Friends of Israel Gospel Ministry reported that on June 7th of this year, informing you that in the recent fighting in Gaza, Israel delivered the greatest moral victory in the history of warfare. The conduct of the Israel Defense Forces vis-a-vis the protection of civilians on both sides has no equal or precedent. Indeed, Israel has set a new standard for the ethics of war. We went on to report that urban warfare is horrific. Since the 1990s, civilian deaths have accounted for 90% of all casualties of urban warfare. Coalition airstrikes against ISIS in Mosul inadvertently killed 3,200 civilians. American bombing of ISIS's last stronghold in Raqqa killed 1,200 ISIS fighters and 1,600 civilians. But in 11 days of fighting, Israel eliminated most of Hamas's significant military infrastructure, and the high number of civilian deaths Hamas counted on did not happen. In fact, many Gazans were killed by the 600 Hamas rockets that fell short and landed inside Gaza. Whatever the precise civilian casualty count turns out to be, it is by far the smallest in the history of modern warfare. Friends, and Israel achieved that through many different tactics. Some were making phone calls and sending texts warning people to get out of the building because, well, it was going to be leveled. Israel doesn't want to see civilian casualties. The IDF even went as far as what is called roof knocking, where an explosive is launched on top of a building's roof to warn people to get out because, well, it's coming down. Here in this video put out by the IDF shows exactly the measures that Israel does to limit civilian casualties. Oh, and by the way, friends, out of the 243 Palestinian casualties as reported by Gaza's health ministry, Israel can name at least 225 casualties that were Hamas and Islamic Jihad fighters. Israel, well, they themselves also suffered loss with 12 deaths and hundreds injured. Imagine, friends, what 4,500 rockets would have done if it were not for the Iron Dome. And does Hamas send warnings out to Israelis, warning them of an incoming attack? No, friends, they purposely are aiming at civilian neighborhoods with the intent and the hope of killing as many innocent Israeli lives as they can. Period. That's what Hamas's goals are. And yet, as a result of Israel's recent defensive war with Hamas, the media and much of the world blames Israel as the aggressor, condemning them for using disproportionate force. Such was the case with Unifor, Canada's largest union, who rather than sticking to labor relations decided to show their hatred for the Jewish state by putting the blame solely on Israel. I'm quoting from their own words in their report. Unifor condemns attacks on Gaza. They said, Unifor unequivocally condemns the atrocities committed on the people of Gaza by the Israeli bombardments that have escalated over the past week. These deadly assaults have targeted residential buildings and refugee camps, a medical clinic, and international media offices. The death toll, including large numbers of children, climbs daily with thousands injured and homeless. The utterly disproportionate and indiscriminate military actions on Gaza must be viewed as crimes against humanity. Why didn't Unifor share with their members in the world that Hamas is a terrorist organization which calls for the destruction of Israel? Why didn't Unifor inform people that Hamas places its rocket launchers and munitions in schools, hospitals, mosques, and civilian homes, and teaches their children to hate Israel and to kill Jews? Why don't they mention that, friends? No, instead they further went on to say that the military assault on Gaza is the fourth Israeli offensive since 2008. It has shown once again that there can be no lasting and just peace without an end to the occupation of the Palestinian territories and a political solution based on the respect of universal human rights and democracy. Seriously? Friends, by ending the so-called Israeli occupation means from the river to the sea, from the Jordan to the Mediterranean. That's all of Israel. Which means if you're advocating for that, you are advocating for the destruction of Israel. Shame on you, Unifor, and shame to everyone or anyone that supports that agenda. I think they ought to stick to labor relations and keep their noses out of things they obviously know nothing about. Or better yet, as the God of Israel says in Psalm 129, verse 5, let them be confounded and turn back that hate Zion. I think of also Psalm 132, verses 13 to 14, where God says, "For the Lord hath chosen Zion, Israel. He hath desired it for his habitation. This is my rest forever. Here I will dwell, for I have desired it." Friends, the God of Israel has given the land of Israel to the Jewish people as an everlasting possession. Let's side with Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East, and not side with a terrorist organization, Hamas. So friends, until next time, this has been What in the World is Going On with the Friends of Israel Gospel Ministry. Good night, everyone.